Hello there, Force of Will players, and welcome back once again to another video. This time we're going to be talking about our new spoiler set, Game of Gods Revolution, the third and final set for the dual cluster that we have released this year. So this is the first full week that we've had. We had the spoilers start kind of in the middle of last week, so it's going to be a little bit more spoilers than the following videos will probably be, but we'll be getting right on into it. So for today's video I used forceofwind.online, very good search engine. It's kept mostly up to date with spoilers. The most recent ones were released an hour and 20 minutes ago, but they're not on here yet. But I'll just be going to the Discord or Facebook just to look at them real quick at the very end. But so going through what we have so far, I guess I kind of need to talk about the rulers, at least for Zeus enters the Game of Gods. So we'll just go over the rulers first real quick. So Athenia is Tails, and then she doesn't have any special effect for her. She has two different force commands. That's her kind of gimmick. So she has one force command on her front side. She has force command Death. On her flip side, for Order of Death and Rebirth, that has force command Rebirth. So it kind of changes how her cards work. We'll see that with her enters the Game of Gods effect. Dragon Flame is a villain's with force command Flame, and then when a card is ordered, you get an effect to gain 5 dragon power, and then the ordered card also gains dragon, so it also becomes a dragon. We'll talk about Zeus first. Zeus is Tails, and he also has the stipulation of you cannot have more than one copy of any card in your deck, so we get another singleton ruler. And then he has force command Olympians. His mechanic is when you flip him, when you order him, you may search your deck for a new 12 Olympian gods. That's a race. New 12 Olympian gods is a race. Reveal it and put it into your hand, and if you do, shuffle your deck. And then the ordered card also gains new 12 Olympian gods. So those are them. And then there's Typhon. Typhon, as his name implies, he is a monster. So he has the villain's tail stipulation, right? You cannot have non-darkness cards in your deck. So in Force of Will, non-effects just stipulate you have to meet that requirement, not you can't have any other requirement. So what do I mean by that? So a non-darkness card would be a card that is specifically green, but a card that is green and, or wind and darkness is a darkness card. It is not a non-darkness card. So that's kind of the stipulation for there. So you can play cards in Typhon that are like green and darkness. You can play cards that are just plain darkness, but they have to have darkness somewhere in their attribute typing. You have no maximum deck size, but must have at least 100 cards in your deck. If you would set your starting life, you set it to X hundred life instead, where X is the total number of cards in your deck up to a maximum of 200, which means your life total for Typhon will be anywhere between 10,000 and 20,000. That is how he will be played. And then he has Force Command Infinity. When you flip him, you can reveal a machine you own from outside of the game and keep it revealed until the end of the turn. So those are the mechanics. So Dragon Flame is working off of dragon power, making things dragons. Typhon is working off of having a very large deck, very large life, and then revealing cards from outside of the game to play them. Zeus is revolved around the archetype New 12 Olympians. And then Athenia is revolved around flopping between Death and Rebirth force commands. Okay, so now that we kind of have set that, one thing I do want to mention for Typhon, it would set a precedent with TOs making stipulations for tournament registration. We've talked a little bit where we're kind of concerned about people just bringing like very large decks, how you would effectively shuffle it, etc., etc. Even just 200 cards is kind of hard to shuffle. So we've talked about potentially limiting, like wanting a functional errata for Typhon to say you cannot have more than 200 cards in your deck. Your deck has to be between 100 and 200 cards, which would be fine. We're just concerned about people being like, oh yes, 4 of every darkness card in the game, right? And like, yes, that's a bad deck, but the whole idea is like you're shuffling a bunch, etc., etc. It just takes a very long time, and is very typically unfun for your opponent because nothing's really happening. So we're talking about it. We'll see what actually happens. Okay, So, starting with the cards and then just going top down. So, Zeus has entered the Game of Gods. So, it is 1 mana, quick cast. If you're... So, it has the stipulation, if your starting ruler is Zeus the First Olympian, you may have up to 4 copies of cards of this card in your deck. Now, normally, deck restrictions overwrite deck allotments. So, like, for example, or deck expansion, I guess, would be the right terminology. So if, for example, I was playing Ragnarok or Zeus or Ayu, and then I had Croco Shark or 12 kimonos or anything like that, I would not be allowed to play 12 kimonos or 20 Croco Sharks or whatever. The deck restriction is more takes precedence over the deck expansion, unless a card specifically references a ruler name. So Zeus enters the Game of Gods, specifically references Zeus the First Olympian, which allows you to play 4 of it, even though it is a deck expansion, kind of overriding a deck restriction. Okay. And then you have choose one. Produce 2 wills in any combination of attributes. Spend it only to play 2 new 12 Olympian gods. Put target new 12 Olympians from your graveyard onto the bottom of your deck. If you're a Zeus, you can add the following option, and then you still choose one. You don't also get the effect text. You just choose one. And the effect text is you may search your deck for a new 12 Olympian god, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle your deck. Treat this effect as the effect of an enter ability gained from a card named Order of the Olympians you control. Now, we kind of recognized what this would be for when that was first released, but Poseidon, when Poseidon got released, we kind of fully see what the treat this card effect is for. So Poseidon has enter, or when this card is revealed from your deck by the effect of an enter ability gained from a card named Order of the Olympians you control, etc., do stuff. So you get their effects when you're searching them off of Zeus, off of ordering with just the order itself. You'll also get their effects. So that is kind of how Zeus is working, that we know of so far. So it's interesting. Singleton rulers tend to have a little bit of a rough time. In FAO, they're a little bit better because your deck also isn't like stuck with lands and stuff like that, like it would be in like Magic or other things. And because of like the draw power and then just search engine that revolves around in Zeus, it'll probably be fine. We need more new 12 Olympian gods in order to really see how impactful this could be. Because right now with just Poseidon's, right? Poseidon's effect that he gets off of it is you bounce something that you control to your hand. So while that lets you do like loops and potentially reuse resources and things like that, it has no like board presence. So what I would want to see for like Zeus enters the Game of Gods is see a new 12 Olympian destroys a J resonator, does something else, generates mana. Like those are the types of effects that we'll probably end up seeing on some of them. We just haven't seen them yet, and I can't really judge the card based on not knowing that text. Now talking about the other text, you'll probably not be using the produce 2 wills in any combination of attributes effect. That really depends on if we get dual color new 12 Olympians. And it also kind of depends on if you need to like ramp up into a new 12 Olympian for some reason. Like you just don't have that mana already. So it's kind of weird in that sense. The other reason you might use it is, so Zeus himself is a new 12 Olympian god, that's his typing. So assuming they keep that intact, the new 12 Olympian like typing, there'll be 11 main deck ones, right? Which means those are 11 of your 40 card deck. Zeus enters the Game of Gods is another 4, that's 15 cards. So it's about a little more than a fourth of the deck. The thing we'd have to see with it is if the deck wants to be predominantly light. Like if all the different Olympians are all different colors, like sure, New Frontiers would have Magic Stone of the 6 Sages and Bradstone, but Wanderer, you start getting like the 5 color stones and other things like that, so the mana base becomes a little bit easier. But the deck predominantly wants to be light from what we've seen so far, with a couple other stipulations that we'll get into with some later cards. So we'll see. It's probably a 4 of, but it's an interesting archetype potentially. No, it is not. The treat this card as an enter does not make this card lore writable or anything like that. Doesn't make it unfair spellable. It still just functions all the same otherwise. Dragonflame enters the Game of Gods. So this card's very funny in the fact that when it was spoiled, I believe this is the only Game of Gods that we have that costs 2 mana. I could be wrong about that, but I think it is. Quick cast, red and 1. Choose one. Choose a J-Res your opponent controls. It loses all abilities. Because it says choose and not target, it gets around barrier. That is important. So this can target things, my bad. It can choose things that have barrier and cause them to lose barrier or other abilities. And then you deal X hundred damage to it, where X is your dragon power. And then target J-Res gains +X until end of turn, where X is also your dragon power. And then if you are Dragonflame, you can pay 1 less to play this card, and you can choose both. So when this card was first spoiled, because of how much damage it dealt, it having to be 2 cost, and like it being like a blank and other stuff like that, my first immediate thought was there is an inset way to gain dragon power outside of Dragonflame. There just had to be, because otherwise there would be almost no reason to make this card 2 cost if there wasn't another form of dragon power gain inside the set. Like, it just wouldn't make any sense, because the card just doesn't work if you don't have a form of dragon power. And then moving on to the next card, I'll talk about them simultaneously. Increased dragon power, red and 1, uncancelable if you're Dragonflame. You also draw a card if you're Dragonflame, and you gain 10 dragon power. Pretty impactful for that deck, honestly. Like, it makes this deal 10. It gives something +10/+10. It can do both, right? So, like, I mean, that kills a Virgil. It kills most relevant resonators. And again, this is just costing 1 because you're Dragonflame. Enters the Game of Gods is interesting. You probably do not play this card at 4, even in Dragonflame. It's probably a 3 or 2 of, at most. Just because it's one of the few enters the Game of Gods that doesn't have like a form of replacement. So like it trades 1 for 1 on board, but like Shiva enters the Game of Gods, draws 3. Machina searches a card and kills something. What are the other game, like even Zeus searches the deck and triggers an enter effect. They just do extra stuff and promote card advantage, where Dragonflame enters the Game of Gods doesn't. Increased dragon power, because it's not cancelable, you probably play 4 of this, just because if you resolve 4 of them, you have 40 dragon power, and most of these types of effects just go into like your item zone, so they can't be interacted with via your opponent. So I mean, just having 40 dragon power is probably really good for that deck. So this is probably a 4 of. This is probably like a 3 or 2 of, if I had to guess. Zhuge Liang, perfect strategist. Villains, 4/4, a single red, a human. When she enters, she deals damage equal to its attack to you, so you would take 400 on enter, and then whenever an effect you control deals damage to you, you produce red. Her revolution, you only take 200 damage if you would take damage during your turn, and then she'll gain +X swiftness and flying as long as it is a dragon, which you get off of Dragonflame, right? And then the +X is the amount of dragon power you have. So she's pretty large. If you order her on turn 1, she's a 9/9. Right, so you would normally take 9, but instead you only take 2. Good. Interesting with how that would work with LKI, though. Because it would die, and it wouldn't retain the buff, but it would die as a 9/9. So the enter would go onto the chase and reference the card as a 9/9. That's pretty funny. So this type of effect, that whenever effect you control deals damage to you, produce red, is interesting because we have Null Magic Stone. So Null Magic Stone is you can tap it, produce darkness, or tap, take 200, produce red. So Null Magic Stone with Zhuge Liang, I think is the first instance of a automatic will ability we've had before. An automatic will ability is an ability that has to produce will and be triggered off of an effect that produces will. And activated an effect, or either. It could be another automatic effect. It has to be triggered off an effect that produces will and produce will itself and not target. So you need 2 will abilities already. Null Magic Stone, the tap is a will ability because it produces the will and it doesn't target. So you would take 200 from this, you would produce the red, and then you would produce a second red off of the Null Magic Stone. So Zeus causes Null Magic Stone to just start producing 2 mana instead of just 1 mana, which is a lot of red mana, which we saw from the recent North America event. So there is potential for the deck to kind of ramp out. We haven't seen the rest of the cards. We don't know if there's more Dragonflame cards that will like do self-injury or anything like that. So it'd be interesting to see, but for the Wanderer implications, Zhuge Liang or Dragonflame decks or whatever with Null Magic Stone specifically seem to be potentially very powerful. It's just a lot of free mana. Yeah. Alright. Einsberg. Mechanized Invasion Leader. So, blue 1. Villains, 10/10. You may play this card from outside the game as long as it is revealed by paying darkness. By paying 2 darkness rather than paying its cost. You can gain control of a non-magic stone non-generated entity your opponent controls as long as it's in the field. Gains flying and +X and J resonators. Your opponent controls gain -X for the X is the number of different names among machines you control in public zones and machines you own revealed from outside the game. God, this is so much text. So this only goes in your sideboard in Typhon, right? Because it's blue, you can't play it in Typhon, but you can reveal it from the sideboard. 2 darkness isn't a lot to hit in Typhon. We'll see that in a second. But then also the gain effect is nice. Mind control effects are pretty hit or miss. Depending on how many cards you can reveal from outside of the game quickly with Typhon, the minus board effect might be very prevalent. Because just having like a 10/10 in play, well, it doesn't have protection, but being like, yeah, your board's -7, -7, right? Stops Priscia, kills Melfi's, so on and so forth, right? Just like stuff like that. So board minuses are typically very good, and then if it's at a high value quickly enough, it can be very powerful to kind of quasi lock your opponent out of the game. And it also hits J's, so it'll just nuke things on your opponent's side of the board. Mechanized Water Soldier, blue 7/7. Remove this card in your grave from the game. Produce blue. Spend this will only to play machines. And it has a Union 7 machine, where this card gains the following text in all zones as long as you control in public zones and own revealed outside the game a combined number of 7 or more machines with different names. You can remove this card in your grave from the game. Produce blue. Spend it only to play machines. Okay, so normally it's remove it, produce 1 to play machines, or you can remove it to produce 3 to play machines. So this is kind of interesting. So not only to do with like older machine type decks and like the implication for those, but also how it's kind of functioning with the other machine cards that are typically going to be played in Typhon, right? But can be used in other villains decks with kind of like a blue focus. And this can like ramp into those types of machines. So that is potentially interesting. So like skipping ahead real quick, this is one of the promo cards, Y Hunter. So it has kind of the same text as you can pay 1 less to play this for each different name among machine cards you own revealed outside the game, right? So same kind of deal. It's blue based, but instead it's darkness based if it's revealed from outside the game. So it kind of looks like they get a cost difference if they're with Typhon, but they do want it to be allowed to play in a kind of machine style deck as well, which is interesting. Could potentially be in like self-mill machines, the machine infinite decks and like stuff like that. I'd be interesting to see like deck abuse that. Like you could play this in Machina, stuff like that. Poseidon kind of talked about this already. The bounce effect is okay. Bouncing your own stuff is good for like loops or resource renewal. Very powerful card for probably limited, specifically it being a 1-mana 7/7. But we don't really care about limited. It also has the Union 7 text, so if you control 7, if all public zones and revealed outside the game are a combined number of 7 or more, in this case new 12 Olympian gods, this card will also draw 3 cards, and you can put a new 12 Olympian gods resonator from your hand into the field, which is a very powerful effect. So it'll be interesting to see how fast you can get new 12 Olympian gods either into your grave, in play, stuff like that, within RFG, even within Zeus. Water of Zeus, a single blue, quick cast, draw a card. If you are Zeus, draw another card, and then you can remove it from the game to make your next Light of Zeus, Fire of Zeus, Wind of Zeus, or Darkness of Zeus free. These cards are interesting. They would be probably busted if they weren't in the your ruler has to be Zeus kind of restriction. However, with light, fire, wind, and darkness and water existing, that's 5 more cards. So now our Zeus deck is kind of already at 20 cards. Like, we've already made 20 cards, right? The 11 other new 12 Olympian gods that I assume are in the set, they could just not be there. But the 11 of those, the 4 waters, or the 5 attributes, right, to put it to 16, and then the 4 Zeus enters the game of gods, and that's a 20 card Zeus pile that you probably don't really differentiate much from. And then you fill it with 20 other singleton cards. We'll have to see what the other ones do. I would assume Darkness of Zeus is like discard, Fire of Zeus is burn, Light of Zeus is life gain, and Wind of Zeus is mana, would be my assumption. But we'll have to actually see what they are in order to evaluate them. But otherwise, pretty decent card. I like the idea of you can remove it to play the other types, but then I'm assuming the other types will also have this effect, but then you're only able to play one of them, right? Athenian is the game of gods. Single darkness, not quick cast. Your opponent banishes a resonator if they don't discard a card, and then the 2 force resonances, right? So if she's on her front side, she's still a ruler. You can remove up to 3 cards in your grave from the game to draw X cards, where X is the number of cards removed. And then her flip side is you may put up to 3 cards from your removed area into your grave to recover Y entities, or Y is the number of cards put into your graveyard this way. So recovering Y entities, that could be magic stones, that could be additions that have tap effects, that could be resonators that have tap effects, that could be regalia that have tap effects, it could be all that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see if people use it as like a mana ramp, which is, I'm assuming, the primary one, but you could also use it in the event that Lycaon wasn't banned, right, for Wanderer specifically. You could use it to like recover Lycaon style effects, things like that, and get some value off of those. Oboe, single darkness, 2/2, tails flying, drain, bane. Pretty decent keyword suite. Enter, look at the top 3 cards in your deck, put 1 into your hand, 1 in grave, and remove 1 from the game, similar to Odin enters the game of gods, one of its effects. Then put X +1/+1 counters on this card, where X is the combined number of cards in your grave and cards in your removed area. So at first, if this is the first card you play, it's a 4/4. Okay. And then if it's revved, whenever a card is put into your graveyard from a removed area, you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on this card. Synergy with Athenian enters the game of gods. And you can remove a +1/+1 counter to make J-Res your opponent controls game -2/-2 until end of turn. So -2/-2 effects are typically a lot more powerful if your opponent is trying to stick a board, and in a world where the resonator lineup isn't like a 10-10, a 40-40, right? It's good for like the Priscia chains, right? Because you get to give them minuses, so you could remove 4 counters, and then suddenly the Priscias can't live. But for other types of like resonator decks, the resonators don't really have a high enough stat value, or their stat value is too high for you to really make advantage of this. However, Oboe does get better the longer the game goes on. Her stat value will just get larger and larger and larger, and then she'll be able to make larger and larger board minuses. So, and if there's any form of like self-mill or anything like that, that could also be very prevalent as well and make her stronger. I don't think we really have too many vampire synergies that matter though, so that's unfortunate. Spirit of Decay, 1/1, single mana. Enter, put X +1/+1 counters on this card, and your opponent loses X hundred life, where X is the number of cards in your grave, and you can remove a +1/+1 counter from this card. Target J-Res gains -2/-2 until end of turn. So it doesn't target on the life drain, right? Which does matter. It is loss of life, which also matters because that gets not through necessarily, but kind of gets around Belial's God Art and stuff like that. It is the number of cards in your grave, but I mean, you could make a Harvesting Season deck with Spirit of Decay. You could play a deck with like Yggdrasil 2.0 and then potentially add all the cards that are RFG'd back to your grave with like Improved Healing Robot and then Spirit of Decay your opponent. It has stuff like that. Like it might be good in Violet, right? Just decks that like fill the grave very quickly. It just has a lot of potential in there. You could even potentially play it in the as like a win con in like the My List Muge like Isis combo deck, right? To kind of play through Belial or anything like that. Yeah, I would probably do that. Because like you're sacking all your stones anyway, and your stones count, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, number of cards. So like, I mean, you get this to 20 cards in your grave, which that deck is very capable of doing. And then suddenly the Belial player just still loses. So, pretty good. Typhon's Antibodies. This is the first of 2 cards, the other one being Typhon's Blood. You can have any number of copies of this card in your deck. So you can have 200 copies of Typhon's Antibodies in your deck, if you so choose. Keyword Soup, Swiftness, Precision, Flying, Pierce. This card cannot attack your opponent as long as they control a J-Res. So as long as you have anything in play, it is not allowed to attack your face. And then it gains +2/+2 for each card named Typhon's Antibodies you control in public zones and own revealed outside the game. So it's just supposed to get large very quickly. And when this card becomes revealed from outside the game, draw a card. That effect is pretty good. Part of the reason why I like that effect is it reminds me a lot of Alice's flip, where she draws a card off of every time she orders, which you could say the same for Typhon, right? He just does it every time he orders. And we haven't really seen a machine, like we have Einsberg and we have Zweihander, but I don't think I would play Zweihander in the deck, and I'd probably only play one Einsberg, and I'd only want Einsberg in very specific scenarios, so I'm probably revealing Typhon's Antibodies most of the time to draw cards and make my other antibodies more powerful, right? It doesn't have any inherent protection, so it does die to board wipes or destruction effects or other things like that, but it's effectively, you're just replacing itself over and over and over again until it gets too large to deal with, is kind of the idea. Typhon's Blood. Okay. So you can have any number of copies of this card in your deck. Darkness. You can only play one card named Typhon's Blood per turn. We're getting into Yu-Gi-Oh! Hard OPT restrictions. Draw a card and produce black. If there are 6 or more cards named Typhon's Blood in your grave, you draw 2 instead and produce 2 black instead. And you pay 0 to play it if your ruler is Typhon. This card is weird. You play Unamount in Typhon, 100%. The question is, how many do you play? Because since you're locked into only 1 per turn, you either have to have some form of discard or mill in order to get the effect rolling quickly enough. And the other thing is, because you're playing between, hopefully, a 100 to 200 card deck, the consistency at which not only you draw these, but potentially draw the rest of your deck dwindles, right? Because if I have 20 Typhon's Bloods in my deck, right? Like, I can play only one per turn. So what if my hand becomes 5 Typhon's Bloods? I'm just not doing anything, right? Like, you cycle and you get a darkness, but if all the rest of my cards, even after I draw, are just Typhon's Bloods, I'm kind of SOL for the rest of the turn. And then you're not really going to generate enough value off of it until you start hitting 6 or more in the grave. So you've already played it 6 times, which means you're on turn 7 because the card doesn't have quick cast. That being said, you also want to be playing one every turn. You are drawing a lot of cards, right? This is drawing you a card. This is drawing you a card when you order. I'm sure they'll probably have other effects to draw in the deck. We'll get into Typhon's Heart in a second. But it's just, it is both one of Typhon's better cards, but then also not super fantastic all at the same time. So I'd be interested to see if anyone who does make Typhon play Typhon or anything like that, what kind of ratios they decide for it. Typhon's Heart. Villains, 4,000. 4-drop. So it has a big butt. You cannot lose the game. When this card leaves the field, you lose the game. Force Resonance Infinity. When this card becomes revealed from outside the game, your life becomes your starting life again. Put this card into the field, then discard your hand and draw cards until you have 5 cards in your hand. There are a few things with Typhon's Heart. 1, automatic effects that trigger when a card leaves the field trigger from the field, which means if a card is under any form of effect negation, like Atomic Bahamut, Separation of Fates, Final Forfeit, other ones, they will not trigger. So you can activate a Typhon's Heart, and then if your opponent attempts to kill it or anything like that, you can attempt to give it 0 abilities or blank it or do whatever you want. If there's a card in Darkness that can do that, I'd have to look through the database. But you could try and do that in order to prevent yourself from actually losing the game. If there's no card in Darkness that does that, then sure, whatever. You just have to kind of find some way, again in Darkness, to try and protect it instead. That being said, again, you cannot lose the game if you have multiple hearts in play. That prevents you from dying. And then it just becoming revealed from outside the game, your life becoming your starting life again. So your opponent gets you down to, like, let's say, like 4,000 life or something like that. And then you're just like, all right, Typhon's Heart. And then they cry. That being said, it is an automatic effect, so it can be lore-righted, it can be faith-singed, it can be stifled, stopped, all that good stuff, rig-vated. But I do like the idea behind Typhon's Heart, the fact that there's technically 4 of them, it's a machine, if you rip out all the hearts you lose, right? It's thematic, it's fun. I don't know, you'd probably side 4 of it, at the very least 3, but we'll see how decent it is. Is that it? That looks like it's it. And then we have Algernon, which is one of the set release cards. Tails, quick cast, green 1, 5/7. Your opponent cannot play cards with total cost greater than the number of magic stones they control. Which is kind of important, the play line, specifically play cards. So that just means they can't do stuff like how Y Hunter says you pay 1 less to play this card for each different name. You can't cheat Y Hunter in faster. It's for stuff like that. It's for effects like Ragnarok, right? Produce 2 free will. It's for playing Phantasmal Ascendant with Umar with no stones in play, right? It's stuff like that that Algernon is good for. When he enters, you get to return a spell or non-magic stone entity your opponent controls with total cost equal to or greater than the number of stones they control to its owner's hand. Return target spell is interesting because that means it can target the chase or the field. And if you do, you draw a card. So he also replaces himself Revolution. If an ability or effect of this card would check the number of magic stones your opponent controls, you may have it refer to that number minus the number of J/rulers they control instead. So if your opponent is playing Belial Dante or anything like that, and they attempt to play Virgilius, they would have to play... They would have to have 5 magic stones in play in order to play Virgilius. Which, I mean, that's pretty good, right? It stops them from getting out any form of Virgilius. It stops Prideful Rule. It stops... Like, there's a lot of stuff they printed, Rigveda. There's a lot of stuff they printed with cost reductions in specific decks that Algernon would allow you to prevent your opponent from playing. It won't cancel them if it's already on the chase, right? But, I mean, you could do, like, the 2, return it to the hand, and then they can't play it. So, Algernon will probably see play. And it's in wind, right? So... What can you do? We'll just go to Facebook real quick for the last 2. So we have Shaka, Shiva's successor. So this is, if Shiva got this last set, it might have been more viable in New Frontiers. So Shaka, Shiva's successor, single green, Mimi tribe. Villains Pierce 4/4. Pay 1 J-Reses you control, gain +4/+4 until end of turn. If Shaka is not ordered, you can only play that effect once per turn. A +4/+4 to board, pretty good, not gonna lie. Especially because field effects like that apply retroactively. So it's not like it only applies to things you control at the time. It'll even account for things that come into play. Now, if it's ordered, we'll get into what the numbers look like when it's ordered in a second. So if an effect would increase attack and or defense of J-Resonators you control, it increases double instead. If an effect would decrease attack or defense of J-Resonators you control, it increases that much instead. Now, replacement effects can trigger twice onto a similar scenario. I would have to re-look into everything real quick, but I'm pretty sure if you would have a decrease effect and it instead turns into an increase, this replacement effect would also apply on top of it. I would have to double check to make sure I'm not wrong about that, but I think that's how it would function. So, like, let's say your opponent gave your board -6/-6. This would make you instead gain +6/+6. This would instead make you gain +12/+12. So it makes board minuses very weak against Shiva, even in the event that replacement effects don't work like that. Because it's not that the effect suddenly started affecting like that and then it can change. It would be, I mean, it would still be a +6/+6 in that scenario, right? Which is still decent, right? It means Shaka became a 10/10 and you're probably playing it in Shiva. Maybe something else. But if you're playing it in Shiva, right, it would be a 12/12 instead because Shiva gives +2/+2 to the board. The other thing is... if you have, or I guess it would be a 14/14, if you have Shaka ordered by Shiva, right? So you play a Shaka and then it's ordered by Shiva. Shiva, I'm fairly confident Shiva gives also the ordered card +2/+2. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it also gives the ordered card +2/+2. That means Shaka will be an 8/8. So it's a 1-mana 8/8 with Pierce and nothing else really. If you activate Shaka's effect, it'll give +8/+8 to the board. So if you have one Shaka effect activated with a Shiva ordered, it means your entire board is going to have +4/+4 from the Shiva and +8/+8 from the Shaka, which means it'll be +12/+12 to your board. Shaka itself will be a 16/16, and then literally anything you play is going to be like better after that. Like, it's just, they're all going to be huge. So Shaka is a pretty good card for Shiva. I like that this got printed probably for Shiva, and it makes that deck a little bit better as like a low to the ground kind of big mid-range hit you like tempo style deck basically. And then I alone am the world honored one. You can pay 1 less, which means just a single one. If you control a card named Shaka, recover target entity, draw a card. Recover target entity matters for a couple things. One, it's a OTK line, right? So you can recover your Shaka to kill your opponent or something else. You can recover a stone. Do keep that in mind. So you could technically recover some kind of stone. Trying to think of a tap effect you might want, but you can recover a stone. You could recover any of your opponent's stuff if that mattered. And then it also draws a card, so it does also replace itself. Odds are you're going to play 4 Shaka if you're playing a Shiva deck. It's just that good. It's better than all the other resonators that Shiva had, pretty much. Shiva didn't really have great resonators in the first place. So you probably play some amount of I Alone Am the World Honored One. I doubt you play it in any deck outside of that. Like, you would play this... You would 100% play this in New Frontiers and probably like a Lycion deck, I think. Because you get your Lycion activation back and you draw a card. So it's just a free activation of a chant at instant speed. So I don't see why you wouldn't, because it also serves as an OTK line. The reason for why I think you would play it in Lycion is not only does it just it would replace itself functionally off of a Lycion, it would also work as like an OTK line to recover things in order to attack your opponent. There's just diversity, I guess, is the best way to describe it. But yeah, so those are the spoilers that we have so far. Those are kind of my thoughts on each card. Which ones am I excited for? I'm excited for Athenia the most. I kind of like the toggle effect, and I've always just liked Athenia as like a character, and I think her art's done very well. So kind of excited for that one. I'm not excited for Typhon purely from a judge standpoint. It's just a hassle for competitive events and things like that. I like the idea of what they're going for. I do wish they cap out the deck. I wish it doesn't say you have no maximum deck size. I wish it just said your deck must be between 100, must be no less than 100 cards and no greater than 200 cards. And then they can just take out the set your life to a maximum like amount. So that's annoying, but the reveal from game mechanic is kind of unique. And then I like singleton rulers. I like it when they're done right. And it looks like Zeus might have enough just in archetype support in order to, like, quote-unquote, be done right. Instead of just ending up being what Ragnarok is, which is just, like, the greatest hits of X soup for the whole deck. And then I'm not, like, a big red deck fan, anyway. Zhu Liang might just be broken because of Null Magic Stone, but we'll have to see on that. And you also just don't have to play Zhu Liang and Dragonflame if you don't want to. You could play it in like a different deck, like Shiva or something like that. Thank you all so much for watching. Sorry I had to kind of do a little bit of a cut, had a small interruption, unfortunately. But anyway, next week I think I'm probably going to be doing a stream for my spoiler set. There's some other stuff that I also wanted to do as well, and talking to people while I'm doing that, and then just uploading the VOD and doing the spoiler set all at the same time will probably be more beneficial. But look forward to that. I'll make a post about it sometime in the next week. But that is currently the plan. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about all the spoilers, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.